The word toxic heat actually comes from the idea that there's this heat that's in one of those layers that is just not having the ability to vent. That heat just continues to build and build and build because it's not going anywhere. And as a result, then a lot of other problematic things happen. You'll see people who have these, very dark lesions and just all kinds of stuff is coming out and weeping constantly and they can't seem to stop it. And if we go to a very rudimentary description, the way we look at it in Chinese medicine is like there's so much heat that you're basically burning the skin.
Dr. Olivia, it is such an honor to have you back here on the Healthy Skin Show. I feel like it's been 4 or 5 years, to be honest with you. So welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be back, and I'm so glad that we get to talk about my favorite topic.
I mean, it's not, let's be honest, it's not usually the favorite topic of those who are dealing with topical steroid withdrawal because they just want to get it done, get through it, get past it, get back to life. But for those who haven't heard our previous episodes and who aren't familiar with what topical steroid withdrawal is, can you just share a brief synopsis to kind of bring everybody up to speed? Because we have a lot of cool things to update people on, but I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting because topical steroid withdrawal doesn't have any diagnostic criteria at the moment, but there are so many people who have it. And I've seen so many of these patients that I can say with some amount of confidence that a lot of the things that I can talk about are definitely what it is. So essentially, topical steroid withdrawal comes about when people have been using steroids. And what they find is they sort of build up a tolerance or even an intolerance to it. And it doesn't have to be a long period of time. It can be a longer period of time, but it can be a short amount of time too. And what happens is when people are taking the steroids, it's usually to bring down the inflammation of a particular skin condition. But what's interesting is that some people actually have a reaction that causes them to have a worse skin condition than they actually started to take the topical steroids for in the first place. So it can be anything from all of a sudden having rashes in places that you never had before. It can be something even more drastic where your skin actually looks like you've been splattered with gasoline and lit on fire, and the whole entire body can look like that, even though you may not have even had steroids on those parts. You can have a really oozy presentation where you have a lot of different lesions that have exudate coming out of them. You can have a super dry version of it where you're flaking like crazy and you're leaving what we call snow all over the place and constantly vacuuming your house. So there's many different presentations of it, but most people who have it know they have it because it is so completely different than the skin condition that they were originally taking the topical steroids for in the first place. So oftentimes it's the patient who's driving the seeking of the treatment because a lot of the doctors are not necessarily aware that there is such a thing since it's not something that's taught in medical school right now.
And I feel like a lot of people have said to me, and I've seen within Facebook groups, a lot of times they're diagnosed with very severe eczema, except I know years ago, I think it was my first, what I came to realize was topical steroid withdrawal case that I worked with. This poor woman had symptoms that didn't make any sense with severe eczema and looked like these really rare kind of weird diseases or genetic issues or something. It just didn't make any sense. But her doctor just kept saying, you have severe eczema. And so for somebody who might be experiencing this, where the rashes spread way beyond where they are, or where they were originally, they existed, right? So maybe you only had issues on your hands, but now it starts to spread everywhere else. You need increasingly more potent steroids in order to try to control the rashes. People will develop things like elephant skin, where it looks like, the skin folds are, especially in the elbows and the wrists and the knees and such, where the skin gets kind of it looks like it's just I don't even know. It's totally inflamed and rippled, almost like you were bunching up a sweater.
Yeah, like they lose all the elasticity in their skin.
Yeah. So,
and I think
that's not eczema. And I would assume from a TCM perspective, when you look at that, you're like, that's not eczema.
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond what it physically looks like too. A lot of the different symptoms that also come up are like thermodysregulation. All of a sudden, people are like super hot, radiating heat, or feeling freezing, back and forth. There's also a lot of issues with sleep, the inability to fall asleep until maybe 5 o'clock in the morning. There's also a lot of lassitude, just this loss of energy, fatigue, and it's not just from sleep, just this inability to really be motivated to get up and do anything, this exhaustion. There's also a lot of emotional fluctuations that come with it. And, as much as, I really can't say that I have met too many people who have had chronic eczema who really had suicide ideation. That's not usually something that comes up together. So I think it's a lot more than what oftentimes it's being diagnosed as. I know it is actually. But on the same note, I think a lot of doctors just are not even aware that it exists. And as a result, they're just looking at, what they have learned in school. And this is the best thing that they can come up with based on what they know. So it's really a condition that needs diagnostic criteria so that the awareness of this condition can continue to grow and more people will understand it. And again, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to write this paper. I do think that the more that's out there in the medical journals to bring awareness, the better we are all to understand what it is and to do a better job of helping our patients.
This episode is brought to you by my skincare line, DermaQuell. The beauty of these skincare products are that they are especially crafted for those struggling with chronic skin rash issues based on my research and clinical experience from my private practice. They focus on organic ingredients that are clean like zinc, aloe, and hemp oil that support and calm rashed, dry, angry skin. There's no unnecessary chemicals or additives that can further dry out your skin or mess with your hormones. And I'm so excited for you to add these creams into your routine. Check them out at quellshop.com and use the coupon code GET15OFF to get 15% off your first order. I'll put a link in the description below. And now let's jump back to the video.
Yeah. So your paper that everybody, I think, who listens to the show or watches the show knows Dr. Peter Leo. He's one of the co-authors of this paper. And I love the fact that he's really helping to also get the information that you have kind of uncovered and that you're looking at out there is so important. So the paper we're talking about today is called Treatment of Topical Steroid Withdrawal Syndrome with Traditional Chinese Medicine, a case series of 5 adults, which I'll link in the show notes. And I hear you, like we need to get this information out there partly for awareness, but also to help build the case that we need. This needs its own diagnostic criteria. We need people to know that this is its own separate thing. So as I was going through the paper, and it's, I think, a fairly easy read because it's not like, 25 pages long, which is really nice. You mentioned something really interesting about there being kind of different layers of the body that TCM specifically works with or looks at in terms of those who have topical steroid withdrawal. Can you talk a little bit more about what are those things?
Yeah, so this is a diagnostic tool that we use in Chinese medicine, and it's not just for TSW, it's for every single condition that it exists, and it just so happens it works incredibly well for dermatology. So the way we look at the skin in TCM is that there's many different layers that exist, and depending on where different dysfunction is occurring will then dictate what kind of lesions presentation that you're going to have. On top of that, it helps us also determine what kind of herbs do we actually select to address those particular problems. So, if you start on the outermost layer of the skin, we talk about that as the way level. And that to us is, anything that's external. And there's a lot of different things that you would see, like hives or something, where maybe you have more unilateral kind of lesions versus bilateral. Okay. But as you go deeper into the levels, and there's 4, as you mentioned, you'll see completely different types of lesions appear. And so the deeper you go, the more disruption you'll basically see. So when we talk about TSW, we're talking about the deepest layer being obstructed or having issues, but then that also causes all the above layers to be problematic as well, oftentimes. So what is really interesting about TCM is that we can actually ask a lot of questions beyond looking at the presentation to get a better understanding of where exactly are all of these different problems existing, and then we can start to treat. Now, depending on where each of these different levels are being affected will also determine other problems that are happening. So I was talking about earlier, thermodysregulation. That definitely happens when we're talking about the deeper layers being affected. When I was talking about sleep, oftentimes that can start happening on the second layer. So as you can see, all these different symptoms will indicate, different layers that can have been affected. And so that's why when you see a typical TCM dermatologist, they will ask you millions of questions that you will probably think, what does this have to do with my skin? We will ask you things about your digestion. We will ask you things about your sleep. We will ask you things about your period. We will ask you things about all these different systems of your body to better understand what layer are we talking about here and to what degree is your entire system being affected.
Well, one interesting thing that you also brought up in that paper is the concept of a toxic heat pattern. And it seemed like from what I read that it is fairly common for topical steroid withdrawal. Can you talk a little bit about what toxic heat is?
Yeah, so toxic heat, again, a lot of this terminology is not exactly as well translatable. And so I think sometimes when people hear these kinds of words, they're like, gosh, that sounds terrible. That sounds like you were in Chernobyl or something. But I think we have to kind of step back and just understand that, translation is not perfect. And second of all, a lot of the ways that the terminology for TCM came about was because it was done 4,000 years ago. It was based on oftentimes observing the world and using analogies. And so, terminology like wind and things like that will come up in the discussion of TCM, and people are kind of like, well, what is that? But, it's kind of taking from nature and trying to understand this is something that I see in nature. How can I use that to describe the skin? Because there was no medical terminology. So anyway, so that's how a lot of these words came about. So the word toxic heat actually comes from the idea that there's this heat that's in one of those layers that is just not having the ability to vent. And as a result, it's getting locked in that layer and it has no place to go. And as a result, that heat just continues to build and build and build because it's not going anywhere. And as a result, then a lot of other problematic things happen. So if that continues to happen, let's say on a deeper level, that's oftentimes when you'll start to see these lesions with a lot of exudate, with a lot of oozing. You'll see people who have these, very dark, lesions and, just all kinds of stuff is coming out and it's weeping constantly and they can't seem to stop it. And if we go to a very rudimentary description, the way we look at it in Chinese medicine is like there's so much heat that you're basically, burning the skin, so to speak. And so that's kind of like how we describe it. But again, these are terms that are sort of simplified because that's the way it was described 4,000 years ago without medical terminology. So toxic heat is a big proponent of TSW. I would say a lot of different presentations have that come up. And it can show itself in different ways. So a lot of times people think of heat as being hot and therefore red and inflammation, but you can also be so hot that you're actually super dry, that you don't see that redness anymore. And now it's actually affected all the bodily fluids, the circulation of the blood, and therefore you start to see somebody who has this very, dusky kind of skin, who's very, they have a lot of flaking. And again, we go back to that idea of snowing, where everywhere they walk around, they're leaving a trail of dead skin. So one thing can lead to another, and as it continues, it will affect other things. So toxic heat can show up as like super red or erythema throughout the body, but then if it continues, it can lead to that next phase where you're super dry.
So one thing I noticed, because you had this nice chart at the end of the paper that was kind of interesting about these cases, that there seems to be, at least for me, no rhyme or reason between like how long somebody actually used steroids versus how long the treatment for in the TCM model was then required. So for example, you might have somebody that used steroids for like a year or maybe less, and then they needed like 13 months versus somebody who used steroids for like decades and you worked with them for 5 months. So just out of curiosity, I mean, obviously this is 5 case studies. And I think sometimes one problem, which is, I hate to say it, but it's ubiquitous in the TSW community, is they like to take really small sample sizes and go, oh, this is everything. So I wanted to ask you, yes, this paper is about 5 case studies, but because you have worked with so many cases, is there a perspective that you can add to this that this paper just doesn't have the capacity to illustrate?
Yeah, so that's a really great point, Jennifer, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think any paper that is produced can only say so much, right? I think that we tried to keep it very tight with this particular paper since it was the first one, and we didn't want to lose an audience by putting in too much information. I think that there's a couple things going on here. So one, I definitely have seen that patients can be on steroids for 25 years and then all of a sudden this happens. Patients can also be on steroids once and this can happen. And I've seen everything in between. So there does not appear to be a specific type of steroid or a specific duration that is required to get TSW. And I actually changed all of my my notes, my intake notes, to actually get data for that. So I actually have every single person write out like how long they've been on steroids, when did they start, when did they stop, why did they start taking it, why did they end. And so I've been trying to collect data to really say, like, is there a duration? And then the other thing is, I know that there's been some papers that say, it's the higher levels. And that has not been my experience either, because I actually document on my intakes too that all my patients have to fill out, what steroids did you actually use? And so I have all of them listed and they check off the ones that they've used and what was the last one they used and whatnot. And there doesn't seem to be a correlation for that either. And the other thing that's going on... I'm sorry.
Can I just ask one quick question? Sure. So is it just topical steroids that you track, or is it other forms like oral prednisone or oral nasal inhalers, those kind of steroids?
I ask for everything. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a good question too, because that's another question I had for myself, is it only topical or is it all steroids? So I've been collecting that data too. I've had some patients who have actually had responses to or reactions to oral steroids. I haven't seen it in every case, but again, we haven't seen it in every case of TS either. So to answer your other question about duration of treatment, that's also an interesting thing too, because some patients are able to afford to go the whole 9 yards and finish up their treatment and, completely resolve all the issues. Other patients, they can find themselves in a financial bind and unable to finish. So some of these patients may not have finished for that reason. And so that's another thing that oftentimes comes into play with TCM, is that it's not covered by insurance and therefore it's out of pocket. And for a lot of these people, they oftentimes find themselves not being able to work anymore. And, it's very, very difficult to continue this treatment if they don't have a source that can continuously fund the treatment. So I would say that's probably more what happened in some of these cases than not. And I see this all the time. And unfortunately, until there's a time when insurance recognizes herbal medicine, this is going to be the case. So unfortunately, that's how it goes.
It is what it is. I wanted to clarify something you just said, because I think most people think of traditional Chinese medicine as going and getting the needles put in different spots, right? I know that there's meridians and all sorts of things, but you specifically mentioned herbs. So as part of this type of process that you provide and have created, what exactly does the treatment look like? Is it also using the needles and whatnot, or cupping or what have you? Because obviously I've gone to an acupuncturist and there's different things that she has done for me that have been vastly helpful. Obviously I've never had TSW, so I've never sought treatment for it. But what is this that you're specifically referring to that you do?
Yeah, so traditional Chinese medicine incorporates a lot of different treatment. And in this country, in order to become an herbalist or traditional Chinese medicine herbalist, you have to train as an acupuncturist first. So I do have, a degree in acupuncture as well. But I went on to do herbal medicine, and then that was a few more years of schooling. And then on top of that, I specialized in dermatology, which was another program after that. So what I do is 100% herbal medicine. And because I treat people all over the world, it's impossible to do acupuncture. So I opted to just do herbal medicine. And I find that it's actually quite effective. It's really nice to have the adjunct of acupuncture if you can afford to do that. But oftentimes people who have TSW are really uncomfortable in their skin, and it's really difficult for them to lie still for 20 minutes with, needles in them. Also, their skin is so incredibly sensitive that oftentimes inserting needles into various areas can cause them to have a little more discomfort and bring on some reactions sometimes. That's not the case all the time, but it can be. But herbal medicine is something that typically every patient can do. And it's also something they can do every day. So, you're working on the body and moving it towards, normal function every single day, versus acupuncture most people can typically afford once a week, which can be very, very helpful. And I actually was treated with acupuncture for my skin condition in addition to herbal medicine. So I do feel like it's a great adjunct. But if you can only do one, I would say herbal medicine is the way to go.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you as well, because the first time you were ever on the Healthy Skin Show was back in 2020, so like 5 years ago. And we talked about TSW at that time. So between 2020 and now, especially, you're doing so much research, you're digging into these cases, you're doing so much heavy lifting. And I want to just take a moment to appreciate you for that, because this is your time that you are dedicating to help people get answers and to help change the current system and the way we view this. And that's a big deal. So is there anything that like your opinions about TSW, has any of that changed as you've gained more knowledge and perspective on it with the multitude of cases that you've worked on?
Yeah, I think the thing that really hits me hardest is how much this impedes people from living their normal life, and also probably all the surrounding people who are trying to support them. It's really something that is so detrimental to someone's life in so many different ways, that I think I feel even more compelled to do something to help because of it. My appointment times with people are much longer than the typical dermatologist. My first intake is usually an hour, and then my subsequent checkups are half an hour. And so I really get to know patients very well because they really open up to me during that time. It's not unusual for someone to spend a lot of their appointment crying because this is the first time they've been able to be honest about how they truly feel about this condition. A lot lot of people don't have the opportunity to see a psychologist at the same time, but a lot of people have a lot of difficulty navigating this from an emotional and psychological level. And, you know, I am oftentimes the one person that they can talk to that gets it, because lots of times they've got parents or family members who, you know, are trying their best to support them and be there for them, but they oftentimes say things that are not helpful, or somehow make people feel not so great. I think, you know, a lot of friends don't understand the situation, don't understand the lassitude, the inability to get up and do things. And, you know, sometimes they end up kind of disappearing as people are going through this journey. So I think the thing that really strikes me is that, I mean, this is just such a, I'll just come out and say it's a horrendous condition that, I mean, it really needs the best awareness, and it needs legislation, and it needs so many different things to make this, you know, come to a point where people are being very, taking this very seriously. And, you know, I think the more that I meet, more people that I meet, the more lives that I've been brought into, the more journeys I've been part of, the more I feel so strongly that, you know, this work has to be done.
Well, and Dr. Olivia, this is not just adults. This is also, you work with kids too. So you're watching children who aren't able to just be a kid.
Yeah.
You know,
that's probably one of the most heartbreaking things. I mean, it's hard to see anybody not be able to live a life. I always say that the worst thing that can happen to you is to be given a life, but not to be able to live it. Yeah. And, you know, and that's another thing that I really feel strongly about. And that's probably where I want to go with another paper, is that there's somewhat of a narrative out there that, you know, this only happens to women, and it only happens to women who put it on their steroids on their face. And that is so not true. No. I mean, I can tell you thousands of men that I've worked with, and, you know, lots and lots of children that I've worked with as well. And, you know, TSW knows no boundaries. It's not selective. It can happen to anybody and anytime.
Yeah. And another question for you, you know, there's not a whole lot of great options right now in terms of like the Western or conventional medicine route for the physicians who do actually believe that TSW is an issue. A lot of times the options are like biologic drugs, JAK inhibitors. And I everybody who watches the show knows that I don't have any judgment against the treatment option you choose. I think that your path should look like what's most appropriate for you. So my question to you is, if someone is really truly suffering and they're potentially considering some of these more systemic drugs, or they're already on one and they're not comfortable right now getting off because they're afraid of what's going to happen to their quality of life, could they still do this option, the TCM option, at the same time, or do you not recommend that?
Yeah, I'm really open to doing what's best for the patient. I mean, I don't really have I think it's really, what does that patient feel comfortable doing? And let's meet them wherever they are. So I have a number of patients who will come to me who have been on a number of different pharmaceuticals, and maybe they're seeing some things resolving, but not everything. And so they come to me and they say, hey, can you help me with the remaining symptoms that this particular drug is not helping me with? So that's one way people come in. Another way people come in is, you know, they've been on a pharmaceutical for a while and they realize it's not their forever drug. And they think to themselves, you know, I eventually want to get off of this. Can you help me do that? And then, you know, we treat that way. And then I have some people who have side effects from the pharmaceuticals, and they know that it's helping them, but they're not ready to come off of them. But they are having side effects and they wonder if, you know, I can help them with that. So those are the three main ways I think people come to see me when they're using pharmaceuticals. And I'll be completely honest. I mean, some people come to me because they're afraid to go on pharmaceuticals, and, you know, maybe the herbs are just not enough for them. And I say to them, you know, we need to have a talk, because if you're not feeling good and your quality of life is really suffering and the herbs are not doing enough for you, you know, maybe it's time for you to go back and, you know, try those other options. So I really tried to talk to my patients to really understand, what are their goals? What have they tried? What are they willing to do? What can they afford, right? Because insurance will cover those, but they will not cover herbal medicine. And we try to look at all of those things and figure out what is going to be the best thing for you today. And maybe that's not going to be forever, but let's think about it for today. And then, if you're at a point of stability later, maybe you can reconsider and look at other options then. So at the end of the day, it's always about what is the best thing for the patient at that moment.
I love that because everybody's journey looks different. And I love that you're able to meet them where they are and help them attain their goals. Because I agree with you. If you can't be, I know we mentioned it's not all women, right? We have men too. If you can't be the dad that you need to be, if you can't be the mom that you need to be for your family, you can't go to work, you are constantly in deep, deep suffering. I'm like, listen, you're not going to get the time back. Nobody's going to give you a prize or a cookie for suffering. We don't get that. So the goal here is to help somebody get their quality of life back on the journey as quickly as possible because we don't exactly know how long the journey is going to be. And so I love the fact that you meet people where they are. It's so interesting. And I'll just share this because when we have clients that are interested in working with my practice who have TSW, or we assess them and we're like, I think you might actually have TSW. We usually send them to your clinic and be like, I'm always like, go talk to Dr. Olivia. Go talk to her first because that may be the better route for you right now because I want someone to really, I think that we have that shared desire to help someone find their way forward, not to just say, oh, they came to me and this is the best way. Everybody their journey is going to look different and that's okay.
Absolutely.
And so I just know from the number of clients we've sent to you, they have had some really, really substantial, wonderful improvements in usually a number of months, where a lot of times with TSW, because I view TSW as a secondary problem on top of whatever the original skin issue you had, and the root causes to those skin issues are still there, that it just takes so much longer doing the more integrative functional route, whereas my perspective has been that your process really helps get them to a more comfortable state. And then they can decide hey, do I still have some root cause? Right. Because there could be underlying parasites. There could be underlying other inflammatory factors, dietary needs that need to be addressed, all that kind of stuff. But I think sometimes this to me is that's why I know how much your work means to people because I've seen it in action, and it makes me so happy to help those individuals, at least get them to the right person, usually you, to really get them out of that crucial state where just they're not well. Their health is really, really bad.
Well, I think it goes back to, knowing what your own medicine's limitations are and strengths, right? And I think for acute symptoms, like we were talking about, the thermoregulation, the inability to sleep, the, severe, discomfort because of itchiness and things like that. I mean, those are the kinds of things that keep people from, living their lives. And so if we can get that down, then, people would be so much more, comfortable. And so it's really trying to find that right treatment that does that. And, TCM is great at handling that if you respond to herbs. Now, I'll be completely honest, not everybody responds to herbs. I would say, 99% of the time I can help people, but every once in a while I find somebody who can't. And that's true of every single medicine there is out there, right? If there was one medicine that worked for everybody, no one would be going to anything else, right? So, it's a trial by error. But I do think that, when people become a little bit more stable and they're still having some issues, then, I look at other people too and say, you might want to try a nutritionist. You might want to go to, these different types of people because, I can do so much, but there's other people who can do other things too. And so I think that's what's nice about understanding where your lane is and staying in it and not trying to be all things to all people.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you too, one last point. It seems to me like you just have such a huge level of experience because you've been doing this, and like, I don't know, remember when it was in the last 5 years, but you just started to have tons and tons of TSW clients coming into your practice. You have probably more experience than I think most, I would assume, most folks in the TCM space. Is what you're doing with the herbs and the assessment, is this what every TCM practitioner does? Or do you feel at this point that you've utilized data points and so many data points to kind of refine what you're doing so it is a bit more of a unique method?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I first started, I was general dermatology, and it just so happened that I happened to treat, and I can say her name because she wrote a book about it and uses my name in it, but I treated Kelly Barda. She was one of the first patients I ever had who had TSW, and at the time I don't know that I knew that she was the president of ITSAN, and so I just did what I thought I could do for her, and I ended up helping her. And so lo and behold, because she was the president of ITSAN, she started to tell other people. And then, one thing led to another and another. And before I knew it, a lot of people with TSW were coming to me. So I would say because a lot of people started coming, I started seeing a lot of patterns, and I started seeing a lot of interesting things coming up. And I had a lot of questions. Like I said before, I was kind of like, is it the duration? Is it the type of steroid? Is it, all these different questions. So I started changing the way that I practice in order to see if I could collect better data. And, when COVID happened, I actually started asking a lot of questions about that. Like, did you get COVID? Did you get the vaccine? Did that make it worse? So I was looking for anything to kind of better understand, like, what are the triggers? What are the things that exacerbate it? What are the things that, can actually make it better? And so I started to actually look at people's supplements too. I asked so many different questions, just trying to get at what is it that's making this worse? What is it that's, leading people to a place that, one day they're doing okay, and then the next day, they're triggered and, things are going nuts again. So I have really changed the way I practice as a result. I also think that because I've had so many different patients come in, I've tried so many different herbs with people too. As we've already determined, TSW was not something that was around 4,000 years ago. Right. There were no topical steroids. So herbal medicine came into being, before this even existed. But there's an understanding of, like we were talking about, the 4 levels and various other diagnostic tools that we use in TCM that help me kind of understand, well, how does this translate in Chinese medicine? So I've tried a lot of different kinds of herbs on people to see how they work. And now, because I've been doing this for so many years, I'm so much better at, selecting the right herbs at the right time. And I think timing is also another thing too, or pacing. When you treat somebody with herbs, you really have to monitor them very closely to see how their symptoms are evolving. And there comes a point in time when you oftentimes have to change formulas, or at least change ingredients, or even dosages of individual ingredients. And so you really have to watch that. And so I think people are kind of surprised when they find out they're going to be seeing me as often as they are. And the reason is because that's what I'm looking for. Every single time I meet with you, I want to say, okay, is it time to take this herb out? Is it time to put in this other herb? The other thing I've noticed is, like, this is a step process. It's not like one day you have TSW, you take herbs, and then you're fine. Usually what happens is, like, certain symptoms start to abate. We start to see another layer of things come through. Then we have to make sure that we're treating that properly. And then the next layer of things come. And then sometimes maybe you revert a little bit because you had a flare. And so, I'm constantly changing the formula to match where you are today. And also thinking to myself, okay, this is where I want you to be the next time I see you. So I want to give you the herbs that will get you there. So it's a dynamic treatment, and it does require a lot more monitoring and a lot more partnership with myself and the patient. I mean, they have to answer all these questions and they have to answer them in detail so that I can really make good decisions for them.
And I think that underscores the idea that healing is not linear. And we can take a step back. I always am sharing this with clients. Like, I know sometimes when you're in it, it's hard to see progress because you see, oh, I did this, I got better, but then I kind of regressed, and then I got a little better, and then maybe it got worse. And they just see this like back and forth. But if you were to step back from the entire picture, like from a 2,000-foot view, what you can see is progress because we're headed in the right direction. But what you're explaining is exactly that. You have to make adjustments, and they have to be done in a very calculated way in order to meet where the person is. So this isn't some like canned protocol that you can go on the internet and just buy a formula. It literally is tailored to your specific situation, your specific symptoms, the severity of the symptoms, all these different factors that you've shared in order to meet you where you are, like you said, to get the person to the next kind of goalpost. So I really, really love that. And I'm so thrilled about all of the new research that you're working on. We'll have to have you come back sometime and talk about that once it's published. And I will make sure to share your website. So for anybody listening to this, that they're able to reach out to you directly if this is something that they feel like would be a good fit for them and they're curious about it. Any final parting words that you would want to share with somebody listening to this who's maybe been struggling with TSW?
I would say, I just really feel strongly that you need to do what you feel like is right for you. If this sounds like something that you might want to try, that's great. But, I'm never going to be the person who judges, if you do anything else. I mean, at the end of the day, we all have to lead our lives the way that we believe is the right way to go. I am trying my best to cull all the data that I can possibly do to help move this forward so that there's more awareness of the actual condition and also a better understanding of all the different phases of it and presentations of it. I think that's another thing that we really need to do. I think diagnostic criteria is nice, but I think people really need to understand that it's many phases and you have to really know what they are to understand TSW. So hopefully we'll get more and more of that information out. The more people I see, the more data I can actually put together. So hopefully I can keep helping people understand what it is and provide some help for people.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate your show so much, that you bring so much quality information to people and you ask such great questions so that people can really understand things to a much larger degree than they would ever on their own search. So thank you for everything you do for everybody as well.
Well, I appreciate that. I think this is why we all make a good team, is because we're all dedicated to seeing things improve, people that get better quality of life. And I mean, I personally believe that the human body is created to heal. And so while our journeys may look slightly different, I love for people to know what options they have so they can make the best decisions for themselves. And I so deeply appreciate your commitment to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
If you enjoyed this video, you need to tune in to this video next. Then make sure to hit the subscribe button so you get notified as soon as a new episode drops. I'm excited to see you there and dive deeper with you on your skin healing journey.